Let's talk about headaches. Many people suffer from what are called tension headaches. Tension headaches are really the sort of headache that you feel around the top part of the head, not the very top, but sort of where you would put a headband, so above the eyes and around the head. It doesn't have to be experienced all the way around the head, but the main underlying reason, that is the tissue system that mainly underlies tension headaches, is the muscular system. There are a lot of muscles on the skull, believe it or not. Of course, on the neck, and they allow you to move your neck and head. There are a lot of muscles that lie parallel to the skull, and oftentimes those muscles will undergo excessive amounts of constriction. The other tissue that can be prominently involved in generating the ache of a headache are the so-called meninges. Now, the meninges are a bunch of tissues that line the outside of the brain and reside between the brain and the skull. The meninges are in that general area and also encasing the brain, and the meninges provide an additional buffer between the brain and the dura and the skull. So the point here is that while muscular tension can give rise to headache, the other thing that can give rise to headache is so-called vasodilation, the expansion or the widening of the arteries, blood vessels, and capillaries. And even though the brain itself doesn't have pain receptors, we experience that as intense pain and pressure. Okay, so now we have two sources of pain, and those are neural and inflammatory responses. So let's talk about the neural type first. There is a type of headache that many people unfortunately suffer from. Those are called cluster headaches. Cluster headaches are headaches that arise not from the surface. People don't experience them as kind of a tightening of the forehead and the neck and the jaw, but rather it feels as if the headache is coming from deep within the head, and in particular from behind the orbit of one or the other eyes, and sometimes both eyes. Cluster headaches arise from deep, or we get the sensation that they are rising from deep within our head as opposed from the surface inward, because they are neural in origin. Okay, so we've got muscular origins of headaches, we've got meningeal origins of headaches, that is the stuff around the brain and as it relates to the vasculature, and we have neural origins of headaches. And of course, there's inflammation origins of headaches. Inflammation is just one form of signaling in the body, which of course includes the brain. Inflammation of a tissue is one way in which a set of cells, so these could be, for instance, cells of the immune system. Inflammation is going to be the case when one particular tissue in and around the head area is releasing molecules, cytokines, which sometimes are called inflammatory cytokines, but there are also non-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory cytokines, but inflammatory molecules that are signaling to the rest of the body, hey, there's something going on here. There's either some intrusive object, and indeed, if you were to get, a BB or a splinter into a particular, skin area, there'd be a lot of inflammation. So it can be the introduction of a foreign physical object into an area that will cause inflammation. It can be the presence of some sort of local toxin in that area. It could be a more systemic inflammation. So for instance, if you have a systemic infection or you're experiencing inflammation of any kind, and it has anything to do with or encroaches on the face or head area, that can easily and almost always spills over into activation of nerve cells. It can give rise to neural-based headache, or to the meninges, and can give rise to meningeal headaches, and of course to the muscles and to muscular type headaches. So we've got muscular origins of the ache in headache. We have meningeal origins of the ache in headache. We have neural origins of the ache in headache. And we have inflammation-based origins of the ache in headache. And that pertains to all the different types of headaches that we're going to talk about. And it's important to keep in mind that there are these different sources of the ache and headache, and that sometimes they exist alone and sometimes they exist in combination. However, and this is an important however, all pain, or I should say all experience of pain as a perception, is going to be neural in origin. When we experience pain, whether or not it's a pinprick or a cut, stub our toe, we trip and fall, or a headache, it is neural in origin. It is the nervous system and nerve cells that are going to carry that signal that we perceive as pain. Head into the next segment, which is what can you take or do to reduce headache? So the first substance that I'd like to highlight that has been shown to significantly reduce the intensity and or frequency of headaches is creatine. Now, creatine, as many of you know, is something that people supplement and take. Most often, creatine is discussed in the context of muscle performance, not just for people who weightlift, but for people who do endurance exercise. And it's often been said that 5 to 10 grams per day of creatine monohydrate, depending on how much you weigh, 5 to 10 grams per day of creatine monohydrate can increase creatine phosphate stores in muscles, can bring more water into muscles, can make you stronger, can increase power output, and that is all true. Creatine, while most often discussed online and in the media as a supplement for sports performance, for the reasons I just mentioned, actually has far more data behind it, that is laboratory studies, exploring the role of creatine in the clinical setting. Creatine can be stored in muscles, as we talked about before, but creatine, and in particular the phosphorylated form of creatine, can also be stored in brain tissue, and is actually quite prominently stored in the forebrain, the area or the real estate of your brain just behind the forehead, which is involved in planning and action and understanding context. So it's very important for cognition. It's important for personality too, but it's important for a number of different aspects of life that have to do with making plans, being able to focus very intensely on your work, etc., or on anything for that matter. All functions that become heavily disrupted in people who have traumatic brain injury and concussion. What I'd like to discuss next, I find extremely exciting. What I'm referring to here are omega-3 fatty acids. Many of you are probably familiar with omega-3 fatty acids. These are fatty acids that come in the form of so-called EPA and DHA, and omega-3 fatty acids are commonly distinguished from the so-called omega-6 fatty acids. Omega-6 fatty acids come in a bunch of different foods, and they, of course, can be supplemented as well. Omega-3 fatty acids come in a bunch of different foods and can be supplemented as well. The particular omega-6 fatty acid that's going to be relevant for today's discussion is linoleic acid, and that is common in a lot of seed oils. So again, I'm not going to tell you that seed oils are bad. However, it does seem to be the case that many people are consuming far too many seed oils, and in doing so are consuming far too many calories, and perhaps are consuming too much of the omega-6 fatty acids relative to the omega-3 fatty acids. Now, with that said, I think there is general agreement among nutritionists and health professionals that we could all stand to get more omega-3 fatty acids, perhaps for cardiovascular health, although that's a little bit debated, but certainly for immune system function, for mood, and for functioning of the brain, and for the potent anti-inflammatory effects of omega-3. In thinking about headache and different treatments for headache, there are some recent studies exploring how supplementing with omega-3 fatty acids, and in one case, how supplementing with omega-3 fatty acids and deliberately reducing the amount of linoleic acid, the omega-6 fatty acids, how that can impact headache. Omega-3 fatty acids are known to have an anti-inflammatory effect. But the omega-3 fatty acids, keep in mind, actually make up various parts of cells in the brain and body. That's right. The membrane that, remember I talked before about how steroid hormones can go through the different membranes of the cells, the outer membrane and the inner membrane. A lot of those actual membranes, the structural constituents of neurons and other cells, are actually made up of or include certain fatty acid, long-chain fatty acids. And the omega-3 fatty acids are important for the actual construction of those tissues, as well as having anti-inflammatory effects through things like limiting prostaglandins and other things that can cause inflammation. Okay, so there are a bunch of different ways that omega-3 fatty acids can be useful. The basic takeaway that they're relying on marching into the study is that increasing omega-3s and reducing omega-6s seems to be beneficial for reducing pain. And indeed, in this study, they find something quite similar, which is that when you hold caloric intake constant and when you look at omega-6s, whether or not you decrease omega-6 fatty acids or not, you find is that increasing omega-3 fatty acids in the diet, so either consumed through food sources or by supplementation, was associated with a lower prevalence of severe headache or migraine. So severe tension type headache or migraine.